All right. Hi, everybody. My name's Chris. Happy to be here today. So I'm here representing Escher. A lot of you guys probably know Escher is a developer toolkit for using Lightning and Bitcoin liquidity against the US dollar. But I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm going to talk about some more big picture stuff as soon as this loads. So internally, before we develop products, we do a lot of research on what we think the utility of Bitcoin is in sort of a 100-year time scale. It's common to focus on its advantages technically over competing systems, but really, I think the big question is, what is Bitcoin going to be used for in 25 to 50 years? Should this be on? Oh, sure. Yeah, take your time. Oh yeah, I got plenty to say. So the research that I'm going to show you guys today comes from a form of what's called corporate ethnography. And if you're not familiar, ethnography is sort of like an interviewing process that goes on within companies when they're having problems. So let's say a corporation is losing money. They're not, their objectives are not being met, but they don't know exactly what's wrong. They typically hire boutique strategy consultants to come in, kind of tear through the company, interview people at all levels, and try to figure out what's really going on, report back to the CEO, and offer some kind of recommendation. So that's the work that I did for many years inside very, very big dysfunctional corporations like Intel and Coca-Cola and GE Capital and BlackRock and Amex. So I'm very cynical about the state of corporate governance and decision making and their ability to innovate in general, which I think will become clear throughout this talk. So fortunately, Bitcoin can save them. They don't know it yet. And I think this is a narrative that needs to be discussed more. I think Bitcoin is obviously growing out of its sort of pirate days of being a rebellious technology, and it's sort of growing up a little bit. When Paul Tudor Jones approves of it, that means something. So the question is, what story do we tell the corporate folks? So just briefly, an outline of this talk. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the process I just described. I'm going to talk about our findings, a little bit of evidence, and then we're going to try to make sense of the phenomenon. I'm going to make some quick forecasts, and then I'm going to talk about how business is already trying to fix this problem and how Bitcoin can kind of slot in and help them. I'm going to move fairly fast. There's a lot of slides in this deck. I'll share it for anybody that wants to see it. So generally in business, we think in the manner on the left, default thinking, we analyze data. Typically, ethnographic consultants use the approach on the right. They use abduction, which is essentially combining data with the intuitions you get from, let's say, interviewing 1,000 people inside of a company and getting a viewpoint from every different perspective. So this is not meant to be used alone. It's meant to be used in conjunction with data, the type that McKinsey would generate. But like I said, this abductive approach doesn't get talked about much. So that's why I want to discuss it. Philosophically speaking, the antecedent of this kind of ethnography comes from a guy named C.S. Pierce, who basically is saying that you should use a very, very well researched gut hunch to kind of lead your hypothesis making. So when we applied ourselves to Bitcoin, this is what we found, and I've been doing this about 2.5 years. The first iterative capital thesis that you guys may have read was sort of the first iteration, and since then I've been doing a lot more. So basically there's two insights. The world feels like it's moving faster, and people blame technology. This is not specific to crypto or Bitcoin or business. This is people in their everyday lives will say this again and again in surveys. And what I note, or what I've noticed, is there's a lot of leaderless movements lately. So hashtag movements would be an example of this. Open allocation software startups like Spotify or GitHub, where you get hired and you don't get assigned or allocated, you choose your own project, sort of a version of this. Bitcoin obviously is a version of this. Corporate reorganizations are moving this way. They're trying to reorganize to be more self-organizing, less top-down. Occupy Wall Street, if you guys remember, was sort of similar. There wasn't really a name or a face that led that. It was sort of grassroots. The Arab Spring in 2011, so on and so forth. So what's going on? Well, since the 1960s and 70s, people have been observing in business and in culture that the world is moving faster and that it's hard for us to deal with, particularly in organizations. So let's look at some anecdotal evidence of what's happening inside corporations that might indicate that things are not going well, despite their stock prices. So in 1958, the average tenure of a corporation on the Fortune 500 list was 61 years. It's now, as of recently, 24 years. About half of management roles are redundant, according to, I think that's a McKinsey quote. I have a lot of footnotes for this. There are about 710 million hours per week done on compliance that doesn't matter. 50% of all of it doesn't add value. That's the equivalent of the work of 9 million people per year. I think bureaucratic theater is a great term. In an analysis of more than 25,000 companies, the half-life was about 10 years. The average holding time for a stock has gone from 8 years to 5 days, and this is all since 1958. Of U.S. companies, return on assets has dropped considerably. That is, generally taken to be a benchmark of performance. Small firms are the only ones getting patents by a factor of 16. And about half of all jobs as of 2013 were projected to be automated, mostly administrative and sales jobs. Productivity is at its lowest since 1945. Wages have only increased 12.5% since then, real wages, I should say. Firm productivity has outpaced pay by almost 6x. And obviously, we also have corporations that are kind of getting ballsier with the way that they defy their constituents' values. So whether it's Project Maven, which was a DoD drone accuracy project that Google did that got a lot of engineer protestation, or the Facebook content moderation jobs, which kind of traumatize people. I think there's a class action suit about that. And obviously the various censorship wars on Twitter and elsewhere. So what does this mean? Why are older companies getting lost as the world moves faster? They're incumbents. They should do just as well or better, you would think. Why is the world moving faster, and why does this change seem ubiquitous? So first, we're gonna dive into a little bit of philosophy here. So there's a philosopher that I like a lot. His name is Bertrand de Juvenal. He has a book called The Art of Conjecture, which is all about thinking about the future. It's a really cool book. The next few slides are sort of viewing this phenomenon through his lens. So he says, routines help save us efforts of foresight. If I have an operational recipe guaranteed to yield certain results, all I need to do is follow the instructions. Nothing matters more to us than our relations with other men, and nothing is more important than to foresee the way other men will behave. So routines make people predictable, and corporations really value this, both internally for their employees and externally for their consumers. They like to know what you're going to do and what you're going to want next year. It's hardly surprising that the maintenance of familiar social order has always been regarded as a common good. Aberrations of conducts were condemned, and change was feared, and witches were burned, and so on and so forth. The idea of security afforded by the routine and familiar was so deeply ingrained that even extreme reformers appealed to going back to the good old ways or the good old days. He contrasts this with today, where he says that technology has advanced what he calls the practical arts. And that term could mean anything from bookkeeping to movie making to letter writing. His argument is almost everything that we do now is a tighter turn. It happens faster. And what that means is that it makes people more comfortable with rapid change. And it also means that behaving ad hoc is not as dangerous. In the year 1400, defying your parents' advice could have been really deadly. Today, kids could do all kinds of stupid stuff and they're fine. We've sort of supported humanity with technology and processes and rules that make it very safe. And so people are fine with trying new things. There's plenty of safety nets. So going back to the issue for the corporate world is that people are not as predictable as they were. They have different opinions, they have different tastes, and it's very hard to keep up with the meme economy, let's say, or the narrative. And this leads right into Clayton Christensen's innovator's dilemma. Why prioritize a product or a niche that has smaller margins today in an emerging market when you could focus on what you're good at and what you're making money at? So this is where corporations are at right now. They're trying to move faster, but they know that that's sort of a waste of time. They should really just get better at what they're doing today. And that's why you'll notice that the overwhelming push is to keep the new iPhone as similar as possible to the old iPhone while still adding some marginal benefit that sells it. So there's a desire to kind of slow consumers down a little bit because their tastes are changing too quickly or too unpredictable. So what is the solution to this? Corporations have just decided to go into financing. That's easier. They're not going to make money off of their products. They're not going to make money off of meeting your needs better than their competitor. They're going to make money off of financing whatever you're buying, and the good itself is a commodity. So what's going to happen as all this progresses? Well, so more bad news. The firm entry rate, which is the number of new firms, will continue dropping. It's been dropping since the late 70s. Self-employment will keep dropping. There are more and more people working for large employers. More small companies will close up. The companies that do stick around will be consolidating, as you've seen in the financial services industry. There's more and more M&A. And this is, some economists call this a state of graceful degradation, where a system can maintain some limited functionality, but is essentially inoperative. And this kind of ties back to, I think it was Parker's talk, where he's talking about the dollar. So we're entering graceful degradation, and companies, especially international companies, are aware of this, and they don't want to get dragged down with one ship, since they do business everywhere. But of course, going global creates more bureaucracy, which creates more slowness, which kind of exacerbates the problem they're trying to solve. So you've seen every big corporation try to go into emerging markets, but it's really difficult. It's really difficult to meet the needs of those people too, especially now that the internet is everywhere and social media is everywhere. Every cultural narrative moves as fast as the United States does. There's not that internet lag that there was maybe 15 years ago. So globalization is interesting, but it's not really a solution in and of itself. This is kind of a point about information monopoly capitalism. So as the businesses globalize, they become more and more information-based businesses, which means they become more and more surveillance-based businesses. So as these organizations get bigger, they also get a little scarier, and they start to move more aggressively, like I was saying about Facebook and Google. So the attempts by business to reverse the direction of this or find a way out have been to, like I said, move faster and get bigger. So consolidate, buy competitors, open up new markets. They also try to do more by the web. They try to get a long tail audience of people everywhere. So they're really they're wringing out every last dollar and every last consumer they can. But it's not going to be enough. Their costs are too high, and their legacy infrastructure is too expensive. So what we've seen from the biggest and smartest companies is that they've started to reorganize themselves to reduce hierarchy and try to move faster. So Microsoft is a big proponent of what's called responsive organization design. This came from the Yammer folks, and when Microsoft acquired Yammer, kind of spread throughout the company. They did away with stack ranking, and now they have much more of an open allocation structure in many of their engineering groups. GE and Pepsi have done similar things. GE in their capital group to be able to do deals faster, and Pepsi in their marketing group. One of the issues that Pepsi had was Pepsi's kind of famous for their tone-deaf marketing. They try to be in the moment, and they usually miss and fall on their faces, and that's a result of the time that it takes for a local marketing department or a young marketing department to pitch something to the senior people in New York, and then for senior people in New York to approve it and then send the message back to whatever the locality is. That takes too long. The moment's passed. So reorganizing like software companies is one of the ways that big companies are trying to forestall the slowness. So like I said, they're trying to become more like GitHub and Spotify, which work more like networks than hierarchies. So I think that's an important note. I mentioned the responsive org design thing. If you go to responsive.org, they have all this propaganda about how to design your company. Harvard Business Review observed something a few years ago they called the rise of the supertemp. A supertemp is somebody that would be a senior director or partner level person. They're probably in their 40s or 50s or 60s, but instead they work kind of like a freelancer on a consulting basis. This is more and more common that these people are brought in lieu of full-time directors. So these are some examples that you guys can look into later of self-managed companies. These are mostly outside the United States. This one's in the Netherlands. This one's in France. These are companies that are operating more like networks. They use sort of cooperative governance structures. Japan is really big on platform cooperatives. They have a ton of stores and a ton of money that flows through their platform cooperative system. So I mention all this stuff to show you guys that there are efforts in the corporate world to organize in similar ways to the way that Bitcoin engineers and other FOSS engineering groups organize. So I think that's an interesting parallel, and it just takes one narrative connection to to bring them together. So Taylorism, which is the idea of putting people on a production line, Henry Ford, it's also called Fordism, he kind of evolved it, is great for manufacturing, but the question is, what is the right structure for a global digital services business on the internet? And what does Bitcoin have to do with that? So fortunately, there's an answer to that already. It didn't come from me. It came from this professor, John Kotter. About 10 years ago, he came up with this idea of the dual OS company. So he observed the same thing, that companies were trying to move more quickly. And he said, you shouldn't have just one hierarchical company that tries to move faster. You should actually split the company into two. You should split it into a hierarchy and a network. And the network operates by emergent consensus. I'm sure you guys have heard that term before. It comes from biology, the idea that a flock of seagulls can kind of move together without any one seagull being the boss. That's similar to the way that open allocation projects or networks work. So he's trying to harness that in a corporate context. So what he says is hierarchies are good for planning, for creating budgets, defining roles, HR, and measuring results. But what they do not do well is identify the most important hazards and opportunities early enough, formulate creative strategic initiatives nimbly enough, and implement them fast enough. And this is why corporations end up either failing or hiring consultants to try to survive. So the idea to make a dual OS company is to have half of the company be sort of contingent people that aren't full-timers. They may be paid on an incentive basis or on a bounty basis. They may be volunteers. They may be highly skilled. They may be not so highly skilled. The goal is to give them really clear-cut work so they always add value and to compensate them in a way that sets the incentives correctly. But the purpose of the network is to always be surveying the business and the market and the competitors and to be pulling information into the hierarchy. So you could think of, if you spend a lot of time on Twitter, like I do, you sort of get a sense of what folks are doing before, let's say, someone who doesn't spend time on the social web. You can sort of intimate, maybe what your competitors are doing or what other partners are doing. So the idea is to have half your company be out there sort of in the marketplace, in the world, and trying to collect information instead of always be playing catch up. So he says about at least 10% of the company should be full-time employees, but the rest could be network. And like I said, they should be carefully selected. There's lots of parameters around that, but this is his approach. So obviously we're eliding a lot of details here, but what would happen if companies in general did adopt a dual OS model, and what does that have to do with Bitcoin, or how does Bitcoin help? So for one thing, new business models would emerge where the products are data. I think a lot of people have talked about this, paying for API calls, things like that. It would mean that a lot of workers never have a full-time traditional role. I think that's already kind of the case. There are a lot of people that just do contingent work, especially younger folks, and they like that for lifestyle purposes. Like I said, there's going to be much more kind of scavenger hunt or bounty-based work. The Signal team has something called BitHub, where they pay bounties for bugs, and Gitcoin is sort of similar, although obviously that's tied in with a whole other mess. So identity and communication will change. This idea of stigmergy comes from a woman named Heather Marsh, who's written a little bit about how systems organize. Stigmergy is the idea of just ad hoc collaboration that produces something useful or valuable, and Bitcoin's an example of that. Communal rule enforcement, and for the employees, expertise without oligarchy. So in systems like this, the idea is that the person who knows the most, generally their opinion is elevated to the fore, or the person that's doing the work, the person that's on the margin. So what is this, how should we think about this, or what should we be saying to the outside world? So I have 3 or 4 slides here at the end that are takeaways. So if you've ignored everything prior, these are the important slides. Why Bitcoin? If we're entering a world of dual OS corporations where these organizations need to move faster, well, how is a global corporation supposed to operate with some contingent employees in sort of a decentralized fashion when there's a risk of internal fraud and the risk of external counterparty non-payment, right? So you need some type of guaranteed, transparent settlement that works internationally, that doesn't need some arbitration court to step in if something goes wrong, or if someone doesn't send the payment they said they would. You need something that is verifiable, and that's Bitcoin. You also need some way to pay people that are outside the United States and are working on strange and sometimes contingent compensation models. So let's say you have 20,000 employees in some foreign country that you pay a few bucks a day to collect consumer price data locally. But they all work different hours and they all kind of have a different approach. How are you supposed to structure a payroll system for that? You need programmable money. And it needs to be something, like I said, that they will trust and receive overseas and not look twice at, like some shitcoin. If you're a web business, how do you collect revenue from all these different countries? So if I'm an American and I'm running a web store and I want to open my web store to everyone all over the world, I don't want all their currencies. All right? I pay my rent and my utilities in dollars. I want dollars. If I receive Bitcoin, I can get Bitcoin liquidity into dollars very easily, and that solves my problem. I don't have to worry about handling currencies from all these different places. I can capture my long tail. I can reach that one person in Sri Lanka that is my customer, even if he or she is the only one. And that's the way to build a market in a digital sense. And also, what digital asset has the security and the liquidity necessary for this kind of remittance? So, on the OTC side, we trade a lot of Bitcoin US dollar, and people tell me all the time, Bitcoin is gonna lose out to some faster coin, some whatever the latest thing is. And the truth is, the reason it won't is because there's no one on the other side of that trade that wants that coin. So if I'm remitting Bitcoin to Nigeria, I can definitely get someone to buy Bitcoin from me in Nigeria and give me Naira. But if I'm sending shitcoin B, who's going to buy that from me in Nigeria at a low slippage price? Nobody. So corporations need this kind of liquidity if they're going to be moving a lot of funds. Bitcoin is really the only option. So, and of course it's dirt cheap and it's available 24/7 everywhere. So as far as I can tell, that's the only infrastructure that will accomplish this dual OS future, and dual OS is the only shot I think that corporations have at keeping our interest, at least the ones that are alive today. So if you have questions about this presentation or you want the link, just ping me on Twitter, happy to share it, but happy to take questions too.
Fantastic presentation, Chris. I think we're still all digesting it. It went by so fast. And what I'm curious about is we're seeing a sort of a bifurcation in how companies work. You've got the big companies, you've got the Twitters, you've got the Facebooks, and they're all co-opting with the government. And then you have the rest of us scrambling to create something that operates outside of the totalitarian regimes that are forming. Do you have any ideas or comments on that?
Yes. So any domestically anchored company is always going to be subject to whoever the local regulator or the local powers are, the local regime. And so I think one of the things that you see QE again and again, for example, my interpretation of that is those are corporations in the financial services industry that have learned how to hack the system to print money. And the consumer products corporations, the other ones outside of financial services, are almost as smart, and they've collectively figured out a way to make the government puke money every 10 years. So on the one hand, they are beholden to maybe collaborating with local governments. On the other hand, they're busy trying to bilk money out of them. Who loses in all this is the people using the service, who are sort of third parties to all this, which is why I think you've seen more and more services like Parler and Gab pop up, because they're agnostic to the content. They're just trying to run a service. That doesn't make money unless you're using really, really cheap infrastructure. I don't think the way that corporations are run today, I don't think Twitter really can make money off of advertising in a sustainable way without having to make unseemly deals and cut corners and do things that users don't like. So I think ultimately users will, kind of vote with their feet and move towards platforms that are content agnostic and don't mess with them so much. But I don't know if that answers your question, but
that's the answer I was looking for. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Quick question. A lot of people talk about the concept of like a decentralized organization, or, you know, we saw what happened with Ethereum when they tried the DAO. But what do you think about people building that on Bitcoin and the future of corporations and how they could utilize the DAO model?
Yeah, so I think there's certainly something there. I think you know, I'll kind of fall back on this dual OS thesis in saying that that there's a lot of value to be gained from that, but you really still need, I think in most cases, in most businesses that exist today, you still need a group of people that are highly enfranchised and highly focused and are not as low time preference, or excuse me, as high time preference. So you need people that are incentivized on very long time frames. And in most cases, the only incentive that really does that is reputation. So if you take the CEO job of a company, in 10 years, you want that company to be doing much better than when you started because it reflects well on you and it, you know, it enables you to get better gigs after that. So I think the DAO thing is very useful for the network part, but it sort of ignores how much value and productivity you get out of ego-driven people who want to make a name for themselves. So that's that.
Okay, I have a question. Do you think the dual OS system would allow the supertemps, they're like the engineers, right, the builders, they would essentially become little pods of entrepreneurs and they could work for any organization, right? They have a certain skill set, doesn't matter who they're working for, and so then the other side of that dual OS just kind of becomes a you know, company as a service, but it's the engineers that really run the show, right? Yeah,
that's a really astute observation. So my favorite term for like the business people, the people that, you know, push paper, is the technostructure. And the idea is that with programmable money, you could basically automate the entire technostructure over, you know, a few decades. So I don't think it could happen right away, but yes, absolutely. Those people are you know, that's who's in that 49% of jobs that are going to be automated. It's accountants. It is other people making kind of low-level decisions. You know, people doing coordinator jobs or associate level jobs. That stuff, you know, if they're non-engineering roles or they're non-creative roles, let's say, I think, yeah, they will be automated and it will just be a company of engineers, which will be nice.
Hey, Chris. Thank you so much. I'm very interested in getting the slides because I have a digital marketing agency, so I was very interested in the first part of your presentation. Sorry, cold. For talking about how everything's going to be more of a network versus the hierarchy. Can you go a little bit more into that? And I definitely want to get the slides because they went really fast.
Sure. So I wouldn't say everything's going to be a network. My argument would be that there are more and more leaderless networks, or excuse me, more and more leaderless movements because the movement pops up so fast that there is no one individual that's sort of like preeminent in the group. So a lot of times it's Facebook groups that engender this. The Tahrir Square protest in 2011 in Egypt was coordinated on a Facebook page by a young kid that was working at Google. And he was interviewed later and he was sort of overwhelmed by what had happened because to his knowledge he was just creating a Facebook page. So I don't know if that clarifies things for you at all, but
yeah, I guess mainly because I run a digital marketing agency, so I'm looking at you call them supertemps or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I guess you talked about a gentleman in Harvard, and you went really quickly and you read it really fast what he was saying. I guess that specific part I want to just go a little more in depth.
Sure, I can go back.
You went really fast.
Oh no, I can't go back. You'll never know. Well, I'll put the slides out. Sorry for going so fast. Like I said, it's a long deck and only 25 minutes.
All right, I'll just get the deck. Thanks.
Okay, sure. All right, anybody else? Thank you very much.